Your Nan never called it poverty food, she called it tea. Every evening at 5:30, that table was laid, the pot was on, and something steaming landed in front of you that cost a few pennies and filled you right to the brim. These were not recipes from a book, they were solutions. Born in post-war kitchens where rationing still cast its shadow, where nothing went to waste, and where feeding 6 mouths on a laborer's wage was not a challenge, but simply Tuesday. Some of these dinners will make you wince. Some will make you hungry. A few might make you ring your Nan. But everyone tells the truth about how ordinary British families ate in the 1950s, before supermarkets arrived and told us we were doing it wrong. These are the 25 forgotten dinners that vanished so quietly. Most people under 40 have never heard of them. Number 25. Bread and dripping toast. Every working kitchen kept a dripping jar. A ceramic pot sat near the range, filled with fat and brown jelly from Sunday's roast, strained through muslin and kept for the week. Monday through Friday, that dripping was spread onto thick white bread, sometimes warmed close to the range until the fat soaked in. A pinch of salt on top. Nothing else. By 1953, the National Food Survey recorded that 4 in 5 working-class households used rendered animal fat weekly as a primary bread spread. It cost nothing because it came from what you had already bought. Children ate it without question. Today we call beef dripping artisanal and charge £4 a jar at farmers' markets. Your grandmother scraped it from the pan on Sunday evening without giving it a name. Number 24. Faggots and mushy peas. The black country staple was sold off carts in Birmingham and Wolverhampton. Pig's liver, heart, and belly scraps were minced with onion, stale breadcrumbs, and sage, then shaped into balls, wrapped in caul fat, and baked until the outsides crisped. In 1957, 4 faggots with mushy peas cost about 9 pence at a market stall. The peas came from dried marrow fats soaked overnight, boiled with a pinch of bicarbonate until they collapsed into a thick khaki paste that pooled around the faggots and soaked into everything. Children scooped them with bread. The smell was rich and herbal, drifting through entire streets on a Thursday evening. When supermarkets eventually stocked faggots in foil trays, the soul had been standardized out of them entirely. Number 23. Spam fritters. When tinned American pork arrived during the war, it stayed long after peace came, because it was cheap and it was there. A tin of spam cost 1 shilling and 2 pence in 1953, and it stretched across 2 meals. Cold on Monday with pickle. On Wednesday, your mother sliced it thick, dipped it in thin batter, and fried it until golden and sticky at the edges. Served with chips and a fried tomato. Children genuinely loved spam fritters, which tells you something about either the recipe or the ERA. The salt, the fat, the crunch of batter against the sweet pork inside was satisfying in a completely honest way. Today's spam fritters appear ironically on gastropub menus for £8. Your grandmother made them out of necessity, and she charged nothing. Number 22. Sheep's head broth. In Scotland and the industrial north, a sheep's head split in 2 cost about 4p at the butcher's in 1952, making it the most economical protein available. Housewives singed off the wool, scrubbed the skull clean, and simmered the whole thing with barley, turnip, carrot, and onion for 3 hours, until the broth turned thick and golden and the meat fell from the cheekbones and tongue. Children who grew up with this remember the bowl of pale, nourishing broth more than the anatomy lesson. It tasted clean and deeply meaty, the barley making it thick enough to be a full meal. By the 1960s, as wages rose and lamb cuts became affordable, the sheep's head retreated from the table, a victim of prosperity and the reasonable desire not to look at dinner before eating it. Number 21. Scrag end of mutton stew. The scrag was the neck of the animal, threaded with cartilage and fat. In 1954, it cost about 8 pence a pound, and a single pound could fill a pot large enough to feed 5 people with simple root vegetables. Housewives browned the pieces in dripping, added diced swede, carrot, onion, and pearl barley, covered them with water, and left the stew to simmer for 2 hours. The fat from the mutton gave the broth a slightly stronger, more animal depth, which made the vegetables taste richer than they were. Diaries from working-class households record scrag end appearing at least once a week through winter. It disappeared when mutton largely vanished, replaced by younger, milder lamb that supermarkets could sell in uniform pre-packed portions. Number 20. Fried bread supper. When there was almost nothing left in the larder and payday was 2 days off, your mother sliced bread thick, dropped it into hot dripping or lard, and fried both sides golden. It was served with a fried egg on top if one could be spared, or simply with salt and a scrape of Marmite. Fried bread was not considered a sad meal. It was a proper hot tea, something warm that smelled good and filled children before bed. The fat soaked into the crumb, crisp at the edges and soft in the center. A loaf cost 9 pence in 1955. Modern nutrition would have strong opinions about this supper. The 6 children sitting quietly around that table before the wireless news came on had none. Rationing of fresh eggs ended in 1953, but dried egg powder stayed in kitchens long after, because it was cheaper. A tin cost about 10 pence and contained the equivalent of 12 eggs. Your grandmother mixed the powder with water, sometimes a splash of milk, and scrambled it in a pan with butter over low heat. It never quite had the texture of the real thing, slightly denser and slightly more rubbery, but seasoned well and served on toast, it was a perfectly adequate tea. Some women stirred in dried mustard or Worcestershire sauce to sharpen the flavor. Others added nothing. Children who grew up on dried egg did not miss fresh eggs because they had rarely tasted them. When fresh eggs became properly affordable in the late 1950s, dried egg vanished almost overnight. The herring was the fish of the British working class, and its near total absence from modern tables tells you how thoroughly our relationship with cheap food has changed. In 1953, fresh herrings cost about 3 pence each. Your mother fried them in oatmeal until the skin crisped, then made a quick mustard sauce from English mustard, a little vinegar, and the cooking juices. Served with boiled potatoes, this was a complete meal for under 6 pence in total. The herring was rich in fat and protein, and families who ate them regularly were arguably better nourished than those buying the cheapest meat cuts. Children mostly objected to the bones. Mothers mostly ignored the objection. When North Sea herring stocks collapsed in the 1970s and prices rose, the herring supper faded. It never came back. Every allotment produced marrows, those enormous pale green vegetables that grew to the size of a small child and tasted of almost nothing on their own. The trick was to hollow one out, fill it with seasoned mince stretched with breadcrumbs and grated onion, replace the lid, and bake for 40 minutes. The marrow's flesh absorbed the fat and seasoning, turning soft and faintly sweet, while the mince steamed inside and stayed moist. A garden marrow cost nothing. Half a pound of minced beef cost about 1 shilling in 1956. This meal fed 5 people for just over 1 shilling in total. Women's Institute cookbooks of the era contain page after page of marrow recipes because the vegetable was free, abundant, and willing to become whatever you put inside it. Pattern break. What nobody says, plainly enough. The dinners on this list were not bad food. Several were nutritionally superior to what replaced them. The herring delivered more omega-3 than a supermarket fish finger. The sheep's head broth contained collagen and minerals that modern bone broth companies charge a fortune to replicate. The faggots were organ meat, the most nutrient-dense item on the butcher's counter. Today they are rebranded as peiti and sold at triple the price in delis. These families were poor, not ignorant. Their kitchens produced food that worked. We replaced it with convenience and called it progress. Number 16. Bacon bones stew. When a family could not afford a bacon joint, the butcher sold bacon bones for almost nothing because there was barely any meat on them. What little meat remained, threaded between the ribs, was intensely smoky and salty. Housewives put the bones into a pot with dried lentils, a diced onion, and enough water to cover. They simmered it for 2 hours, fished out the bones, and stripped the meat back into the pot. The result was a thick, smoky soup that tasted far more substantial than its ingredients suggested. It was served with a thick slice of bread and nothing else. In pit villages across the north, this was a Wednesday meal, midway through the week, when Sunday's joint was gone and the weekend was still 2 days away. Number 15. Potato and onion soup. 2 ingredients. Potatoes, which every household had, and onions, which kept for months in the larder. Your grandmother sweated the onion in dripping, added the potatoes and water, seasoned with salt and white pepper, and simmered until the potatoes broke down into a thick, starchy broth. Some women added a spoonful of flour to thicken it further, others a little dried milk powder for richness. The National Food Survey noted that potato consumption in working-class households in 1952 averaged over 6 pounds per person per week. This was not because the British loved potatoes above everything else. It was because potatoes were the most affordable calorie available, and soup was just potatoes in a different form. Number 14. Kippers with brown bread. A pair of smoked herrings cost about 4 pence at the fishmonger's in 1955 and required almost no preparation. Your mother grilled them for 3 minutes aside, or poured boiling water over them in a jug, and left them to stand for 5 minutes, the method that spared the kitchen from smelling of fish for 3 days. Served on brown bread with a scrape of butter. The flesh was copper-colored and intensely smoky, the oil soaking into the bread below. Children who loved kippers remembered the smell as Saturday mornings. Children who did not love them remembered it differently. What ended the kippers' daily presence on ordinary tables was the same collapse of the fishing industry that took the herring supper, compounded by the rise of the cereal aisle. People think of suet puddings as sweet things, but in the poorest 1950s, kitchen suet appeared more often in savory form because it was cheap and it filled. Your grandmother made suet pastry, rolled it flat, scattered it with fried onions, sage, salt, and pepper, rolled it into a log, wrapped it in a floured cloth, and steamed it for 2 hours. Sliced thick and served with a thin onion gravy made from dripping flour and water, this was a full evening meal with no meat required. By 1954, suet cost about 2 pence a pound from the butcher. A whole pudding cost under 3 to make and fed 4 people. It has vanished so thoroughly that most people under 60 have never seen a savory, sweet pudding on a plate. Whatever remained from Sunday's joint came off the bone and went through the hand mincer. Mixed with cold mashed potato, dried herbs, salt, pepper, and a beaten egg to bind, the mixture was shaped into flat rounds, dusted in flour and fried in hot dripping until the outside turned brown and crisp. The rissoles was the kitchen's answer to the leftover problem, a transformation that turned scraps into something that looked and smelled like a proper meal. Members of the Women's Institute traded variations, adding Worcestershire sauce, grated onion, or dried mustard. Children often preferred rissoles to the original roast, because frying gave them a golden, salty crust. When the hand mincer disappeared into the back of the cupboard in the 1970s, the rissoles largely went with it. Pattern break, the forgotten arithmetic. In 1955, the average male factory worker earned about £7 10 shillings a week. Rent took roughly £2. Fuel and clothing took another £1. That left £4 to £5 to feed a family. The average British family in 1955 had 2.4 children. £4 for the week for 4 or 5 people. That is why these dinners look the way they look. It was not lack of skill or ambition, it was mathematics. Tinned pilchards in tomato sauce cost about 7p a tin in 1956 and were considered too strong and too cheap for anything except the most basic meal. Your mother would tip the tin into a baking dish, lay thin potato slices over the top, season with salt and pepper, add a splash of water, and bake for 40 minutes. The pilchards dissolved almost entirely into the sauce during baking, their strong flavor mellowing into something almost sweet and deeply savory. Children who refused pilchards cold from the tin would eat this without complaint because it looked and tasted completely different. The dish cost under 9p in total and required nothing but an oven. It appeared in every Women's Institute practical cookery booklet of the era and has not appeared in a cookery book since approximately 1971. Split red lentils cost 3p a pound in 1955. 2 cheap rashers of streaky bacon, cut small and fried until the fat rendered. Add a diced onion, a carrot, half a pound of red lentils, a bay leaf, salt, pepper, and enough water to fill the pot. Simmer for 30 minutes until the lentils collapsed into a thick orange soup. The bacon was barely present in quantity, but entirely present in flavor, its smokiness running through every spoonful. Mining families in Durham and Yorkshire relied on lentil soup as a primary midweek supper throughout the 1950s. When convenience soups arrived in the 1960s, the pot of lentils was left behind. No tin of Heinz lentil soup has ever tasted like the version simmered with proper streaky bacon. Not toast, not warmed bread. Simply 2 slices of white bread, spread on one side each with cold beef dripping from the jar, pressed together, and eaten at the kitchen table. The dripping set firm overnight in the cold larder, the brown jelly at the bottom carrying a faint memory of meat. Children took dripping sandwiches wrapped in grease-proof paper to school in the early 1950s. By 1958, when more families were buying sandwich meats, dripping sandwiches had become a source of mild shame. By the 1970s, they had nearly vanished. Today, a jar of properly rendered beef dripping from a quality butcher costs more than a sandwich made with anything else. The working classes were ahead of the artisanal food movement by 60 years, and nobody noticed. Before anyone objects, this was not foraging as a lifestyle choice. In weeks before payday, particularly in rural areas, housewives sent children into the garden with gloves and a colander to collect the young tips of stinging nettles in spring. Washed and blanched to remove the sting, and cooked with onion, potato, and water, nettles made a vivid green soup with a flavor somewhere between spinach and watercress. Rich in iron and vitamin C, it filled a genuine nutritional gap in a diet heavy on bread and potatoes. Ministry of Food publications had enthusiastically promoted nettle soup during the war years, and rural families continued making it well into the 1950s through habit and common sense. The practice faded as supermarket vegetables became affordable year-round, and the knowledge of which plants were edible retreated from everyday memory. A pig's cheek, cured like bacon, cost about 8p in the 1950s, enough to anchor a full-boiled dinner for 4. Your grandmother soaked it overnight to draw out excess salt, then boiled it with carrots, onion, and potatoes for 2 hours until completely tender. The cheek meat was finely grained and extraordinarily gelatinous, the fat rendering completely during boiling and leaving the lean meat almost silky. Served in thick slices with the pot vegetables and a dab of mustard, it cost under a shilling and left no complaints. The pig's cheek disappeared as butchers moved toward uniformity and cuts that could be pre-packed and priced per 100 grams. You can find it now in specialty butchers and Italian delis, where it is called guanciale and costs considerably more. Large onions were parboiled until barely tender, then hollowed out carefully. The scooped interior was chopped and mixed with stale breadcrumbs, dried sage, salt, pepper, and enough gravy to bind. This stuffing was packed back into the shells, which were baked in a tin for 30 minutes until the onions softened completely and the crumbing on top turned golden. Served 2 per person with boiled potatoes, this was a complete meal containing no meat at all, yet it did not feel like an absence. The onion, cooked for a long time, became sweet and savory at once. The sage breadcrumbing absorbed the juices and became something greater than its parts. By 1952, the Ministry of Food had declared sage among the most valuable herbs for working families. Whether that was strictly true or not, sage was in every kitchen cupboard. The neck cut was what the butcher sold when the shoulder was gone, and the leg was beyond the budget. Cut into rounds, it cost about 6 pence per pound in 1955. Housewives dropped the pieces into salted water with a whole onion, carrots, and pearl barley, and left it to simmer for 2.5 hours. The resulting broth was rich with fat and collagen from the bones, and the scant meat on each piece came away cleanly and tasted pure. Slices of bread went into the broth at the end, soaking it up. In some households, the broth was served first, the neck pieces second, stretching one pot into what felt like 2 courses. The meal appeared in Ministry of Food pamphlets throughout the early 1950s under economical meat dishes. It has not appeared anywhere since. Number 4. Pig's fry. Liver, heart, and lights from a single pig, sold together cheaply because separately they were not worth much. Your grandmother sliced everything thin, dusted it in seasoned flour, and fried it fast in hot dripping with onions, serving it over mashed potato with a thin gravy from the pan juices. The combination was intense. The liver with its metallic richness, the heart with its denser texture, the lights lighter and more delicate. Seasoned correctly, they complemented each other in a way single-organ dishes never quite replicated. In Staffordshire and the Welsh borders, pig's fry was a butcher's staple sold in paper parcels with cooking instructions included as standard. It vanished when confidence in offal cooking faded, along with the independent butcher who had sold it. This entry deserves an apology, because belly of pork in the 1950s was the cheapest pork cut available, considered too fatty for a proper Sunday table. It spent 40 years being scorned before restaurants discovered it, and began charging £17 a plate in 2009. Your grandmother paid 10 pence per pound in 1956. She scored the skin, rubbed it with salt, and roasted it low and slow for 2 hours with quartered cooking apples packed around it. The fat basted the meat continuously. The skin turned to crackling that shattered at a touch, and the apples collapsed into a sauce that cut through the richness. It went into the oven when the family left for church, and was ready when they came home. It disappeared from everyday tables, not because it was bad, but because it was cheap, and cheap had become something to escape. Number 2. Bread pudding. Not bread and butter pudding. The other one, stale bread soaked completely in milk until it turned to mush. Squeezed out, mixed with dried fruit, suet, sugar, mixed spice, and a beaten egg, packed into a shallow tin and baked for 1 hour and 15 minutes until the top turned dark brown and slightly sticky. Cut into squares and served warm, bread pudding was simultaneously a dessert and a way to use bread that was beyond reviving by any other method. School tuck shops sold it. Market stalls sold it by the piece. Mothers made entire batches to feed children through the week. A square at tea time sufficient to tide a child between school and supper. When supermarket baked goods arrived, bread pudding had no place in the supply chain. Too dense to slice uniformly, too moist to package easily, and too honest to sell at a premium. Number 1. Potted meat on toast. The meal that tells the truest story of the poor kitchen in the 1950s is not a stew or a bake or a steamed pudding. It is the meal assembled from what you already had. Leftover scraps from Sunday's joint were minced through the hand grinder, packed into a small basin with a little cooking liquor, sealed with a thin layer of dripping, and chilled in the cold larder until firm. It was spread onto toast made by holding bread to the bars of the range, and eaten at the kitchen table on a Wednesday evening, with the wireless on and the curtains drawn. It cost nothing beyond what had already been bought. It wasted nothing. To the children who ate it without question, it tasted like exactly what supper was supposed to be. In the 1950s, 500,000 British households ate some version of potted meat each week. Today, the ceramic pot has become a decorative object. The hand grinder is in an antique shop. The skill of turning nothing into something has been replaced by a supermarket delivery. Whether that is progress or loss depends entirely on what you think we were running toward. These 25 dinners are not old recipes. They are evidence of an intelligence that operated entirely without waste, without surplus, and without the luxury of throwing anything away. Your Nan was not cooking out of nostalgia. She was solving problems with whatever the larder had left. Every one of these dishes solved the same problem. There are mouths to feed, there is not much money, and it is 5:30 on a Tuesday. If any of these are part of your family's memory, share them in the comments. I want to know which ones you recognize.